This is the Raiders on the Record podcast. Today we feature Josh Colvin. Josh is originally from South St. Paul and Red Wing, Minnesota. In 2007, Josh was hired at Hastings High School and began his social studies teaching career. Throughout that time, he's coached a variety of sports, including football, hockey, and girls golf. Josh gives a great interview where he really highlights the relationships teachers and coaches make with their student athletes. All right, here we are with Josh Colvin. Josh, let's start at the beginning of your life here. I know it's maybe not the typical path someone has gone down to get to where we are, but let's start with you growing up. Where'd you grow up at? Talk about your hometown, high school you attended here, eventually mom, dad, brothers, sisters, all that good stuff.
Sure. Yeah, you and I have touched base a little bit. I had an interesting childhood. We can just call it that way. I'll leave out the stuff that is not really pertinent to this, but it definitely guided me. I grew up in South St. Paul, a single mother. I was a child of a teenage pregnancy with an absentee father who I still have never met. But South St. Paul was a great town to grow up. It was very Hastings-like, blue collar mentality. People were part of things, really celebrated a lot of stuff and created a lot of opportunities. So I grew up there with my mom. My grandfather filled that role of father in my life. He was a huge sports fan, played for South St. Paul and hung a couple of those hockey banners, and then went on and served in the military and the Air Force and played hockey there as well. He was a multi-sport athlete, small dude relative to me. I'm a little bit of a bigger size guy. I wasn't heavy in high school like I am now in middle age, but he was about 5'6", 5'7", whereas I'm pushing closer to 6'2". So he was a baseball, hockey guy. And nobody else in my family was really into sports. My mom was one of 8. And so she was the second oldest. And so I didn't have any brothers or sisters growing up. And my aunts and uncles were like that, where I was the oops baby for them almost. Where my uncle Toby did play basketball. He was the only other athlete in the family. And he was probably, I want to say Toby was about 8 years older than me, 9 years older. He was the second youngest of my aunts and uncles. So it was a huge family, very Polish Catholic with I was the oldest of, last I had counted like 36 first cousins. And I was really blessed in the time that I grew up. South St. Paul was a very safe place. It was the typical latchkey childhood that those of us in our late 40s, early 50s remember. It was in the summer, your parents didn't know where you were and they didn't want to know. It was get out of the house. So I grew up going to Vets Park with my buddies playing hockey all winter. And then in the summer, we would just show up at the central school that had football, basketball, all that. You'd show up with a couple of different items for sports. And that's how you'd spend all day, is playing whatever you had enough kids for. And in the winter, literally, I lived at Vets Park when I wasn't at Wakota Arena. And so I was in South St. Paul, finished up my freshman year there. And then, like I said, I come from an interesting family, so some different choices had to be made. I moved to Red Wing at the beginning of my sophomore year there. And then I moved in with who became my family, the Colvins, towards the very end of my junior year. And with that, I ended up with 2 sisters. I guess from a legal standpoint, there's really nothing there, but they basically adopted me. I took their last name. My sisters are my sisters. You would never know. And we always actually laugh when we go out, my dad and I. People be like, oh, you can tell he's your dad. And no, there's no blood there, but you look similar enough. And then how much he cared for me. And even Charlie, my son, looks a lot like my, call it foster mom, who I just call my mom, Luann. They look really similar in pictures. And so then I finished high school in Red Wing. And then, yeah, that kind of takes me through that. I was, like you said, multi-sport athlete. Pam, my biological mom, one thing that she did really was she just wanted to expose me to everything. So I wrestled for a year and hated it because like I learned quickly that those guys are tough. And I don't remember what happened, but it felt like he wrapped my leg around my own neck and choked me out. I know that's not possible, but it felt close to it. But football in the fall, and then the spring was a variety. Played baseball. I ended up playing 3 different high school sports in spring, lettered in all 3 of them. I played baseball until a guy in Red Wing, Paul Hartman, came up, who ended up playing for the Gophers for a little bit. He's a head coach down in Red Wing now. But I saw the writing on the wall in baseball, and I would have rather just played. So I went out for tennis my junior year, played doubles, and then they were short kids for golf, so I went out for golf my senior year. But hockey and football were the 2 that were consistent.
Nice. So you graduated from Red Wing High School. Let's take us, I know it's probably another huge journey to where we are today, but let's go through maybe post high school. Did you play any sports in college? I know maybe once again you had a little bit of a different path to where we are today, but let's maybe get from Red Wing High School graduation to Hastings High School as well.
Yeah. So I talk about this actually in class that if you run into people that remember me from high school, they'll know I was in sports. They'll know I was in a big part of those kind of things. But actually, I was more known for music by the time I graduated Red Wing than I was for sports. I was in everything musically. You get done halftime at the football game, you take, much like Elliot Reddick,
Mm.
halftime at the football game, you pop the shoulder pads off, go out and play on the halftime show, come back in, get yelled at more by your coach, and go back out and finish the game. And so the reality is, with the family background I had, college just wasn't an option realistically for me right after high school for two reasons. One, financially, there was just no way. I was on my own by that point. The Colvins were not affluent by any stretch. They actually were teenage pregnancies as well that got married and are still married today, but they had two daughters to raise and they weren't going to, they actually, my one youngest sister went to college right after high school. They didn't have the means to help out with that. And the reality is I just wasn't a good enough athlete in the sport that I was best at, hockey, to be a scholarship athlete. That's D1. And you look at what D3 is around here, especially back in 93, it was, man, you had to be good academically. And with the journey I had, I just wasn't a very good high school student. I didn't understand those two correlations. I didn't, not making excuses by any stretch, but the reality is I didn't have the guidance of somebody to say, hey, here's what you got to hit the classroom first. Otherwise, these opportunities don't matter. And so while there were D3 opportunities athletically, specifically for hockey, there just wasn't the academics to back it up. And the other thing was I just wasn't mature enough and ready for college at 18. Basically, I left. I did the music thing. I traveled. I wandered all over, did, man, a ton of different jobs. And then we talk about an interesting journey at 25. My wife and I are married, and then we were in a really bad car accident on 316 and 61, where they got the big roundabout now. That wasn't a roundabout back then. And we were in a really severe car accident when I was 25, and that completely changed everything. I'd already actually enrolled in college just to take one credit to see if I could do it at a community college. And then the accident happened. And then I went through, I suffered a traumatic brain injury and went through cognitive rehabilitation, at a place called Courage Center up in St. Louis Park. And that took me, my wife would know the timetable. For me, again, it was a brain injury, so I don't remember it all very well, but it was probably about a 2-year process. And then I actually full-time enrolled in college then at 28 years old. So I took about, realistically, from heavy duty being involved in sports, I took about a 6-7 year break because of the accident and those kind of things. And then when I got back into college, I was really focused on my studies and then focused on trying to get myself into a position to get a teaching job. So in college, I wasn't heavily involved. I did work with some youth programs, specifically hockey. But the other thing is I spent my time volunteering with, to be honest, like battered women's shelters, where I'd go in and work with the kids that were there as people were in transitioning from tough family lives. And I spent my time really focusing on those kind of things. The interesting thing is from there, then I graduate college and I get the phone call from Mike Johnson. I was in Jamaica, by the way. I get the phone call from Mike Johnson. Hey, you thinking about, how would you feel about teaching in Hastings? And so I get that call. I got hired the same year as Jason Cook and Dana Strain. And so I flew back from Jamaica. School was going to start in about 2 weeks. And Dana calls me on a Sunday and says, hey, I hear you've got some football experience. And I come in and meet with him the next day and we talk it through. And I'm like, hey, it's been a while. I'm not looking to be a varsity coach right away. I got a lot to catch back up on. And he goes, how about ninth grade? I said, perfect. He goes, we'll have you with Coach Welch. And I just stopped. And I said, Russ Welch? He goes, yeah, do you know him? And I'm like, yeah. So in South St. Paul, Russ Welch was actually my ninth grade health teacher, phy ed teacher, football coach, hockey coach, and baseball coach. And so my first day as a freshman teacher was back with the guy who I spent a whole lot of freshmen of high school with, Russ Welch.
That's awesome. And what about getting back into hockey? What did that look like when you first got hired? Because I know a lot of teachers, when they first get hired, it's hard to get back into the classroom and figure out what you're doing there. And then once again, you're coaching football. So the fall's a little bit hectic when it comes to that stuff. And then when you're rolling right into winter and you're coaching then too and trying to teach. So what did that look like for you for hockey?
Corkish ran into the halls, found out I was a hockey guy and a goalie guy. So the one sport I had stayed most involved with coaching was hockey, because as a goalie, there's always a demand. It's a very specialized thing. There just aren't a lot of people. So even when my wife and I spent a little bit of time in Waseca, all of a sudden I ended up coaching there. And that was before they even had a high school program. And so hockey's the one I'd stayed involved with the most, just because there was always people asking. And so I'll never forget, I'm in the commons, I'm a brand new teacher, and this loud Canadian dude comes up and, "Hey, I heard this, I heard this, and what do you think about coaching girls?" And I'd never coached girls, and I just wanted to coach kids. So I'm like, "Yeah."
Mhm.
So it blurred right into it. Yeah, to your point, football season, especially for girls hockey, is the first winter sport. So I'm in ninth grade football, but I'm also in the booth with varsity trying to learn as much as I can from Cook and all the other guys there. Cook was at the time a wide receiver coach in his first year. And football goes right up to tryouts for hockey. And I came on, and one thing, man, Cork is one of the best at this I've ever seen. He just collects people. If he thinks you're a good person, you're willing to work. We had coaching staffs for girls hockey. I'm not exaggerating, of 8 guys. We'd have five. You're only allowed, I think, three. And there were times we had 5 guys on the bench, and it was constantly new people coming in that Cork just wanted to surround the girls with good people. And so I was actually fortunate enough to coach with Cork, and then Chuck Mortel in his last year coaching. I was a goalie coach with him. He took Devin Alwyn, who he'd coached all the way up to finish out with. And then I worked with Lizzie Callahan and Steph Weichel, and transitioned there. And then I think Russ asked me to help out, maybe because Klein was here. So he worked a little bit with goalies as an assistant. Maybe it was a second or third year. Russ then asked me to start putting some time in to help out with the boys a little bit as well. So I just jumped in right away. And we talk about, you asked me about my wife earlier. This, you got little ones and you got a wife. You cannot do this job without a wife who's a
Mhm.
coach's wife. Basically, my first couple of years of teaching was get up at 6 a.m., get to school to prep, go to coach, go back, get your classroom stuff done, go home, and then completely collapse in exhaustion. And my wife never complained, never made me feel guilty. She'd wake me up, she'd cook me dinner, and I'd go back to sleep. And that's what it looks like. So you talk about how to jump into all of that. None of that could have happened without my wife supporting all of it, including this year. When I took the girls' golf job, I asked her, "How do you feel about it? Because it's going to cost our family too."
Mhm. Yeah, and it's hard to you just said it, you're pretty much coaching you're teaching obviously from August, September, all the
Mhm.
way to June, and then now you're coaching at the same time, so
Yeah.
you basically get to school maybe around 7 o'clock, and you're there from 7 all the way till
Yeah.
6 o'clock at night. You go home, you catch one of Charlie's games now, and you try to be the best dad and the best, husband you can. It's hard, and without a good wife or even our females that coach as well, without a good husband at home to take care of those loose ends, it's almost impossible to do, so it's extremely difficult.
To that point, I remember watching Cork's induction ceremony, and every coach for Hall of Fame, girls hockey coaches said the same thing. They thank their wives. Yeah, it's a huge cost. I'm out the door before my wife. She wakes up before me. I don't, as you can see, I'm not a big grooming guy. I don't have a lot of high maintenance habits here, but yeah, I'm up and out the door before 6 a.m. trying to get a workout in, trying to get prep done. I'm at the school usually before 6:30 because I know as soon as that bell rings, I'm out doing other stuff. And then, like you said, I get home, I just want to be present as much as I can, which, hey, I'm not perfect. There's a lot of falling asleep on the couch still. So,
For sure. Before we get to some of the other questions, you mentioned it too, and you've coached a wide variety of sports here at
yeah.
Hastings High School. I've a lot of boys, a lot of girls, and even boys and girls, both in hockey as well. What do you think a difference is? Maybe there isn't a difference for you, but a difference between coaching boys and girls. What do you think that would be for you?
Huge difference.
Mhm.
Huge difference. And that's not a better or worse. I think you find your temperament. I think I do better coaching with girls. Maybe it's being raised by a single mother and the respect I had for the struggle she had there. Maybe it's just how much I look up to my wife and all that kind of stuff. But I click better in general coaching the sports that I've coached both genders. I click better coaching with the girls. It doesn't mean I feel like I have a harder time with the boys. It's just different. Here's what I would say. Let me give you an anecdote to tell you what I think is the difference. I was coaching learn to skate, literally 5-year-olds. And we had all these stations. But the little boys come up and they're on the wall. And it's okay. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna race from here to that. Johnny, stop it.
Mhm.
Stop hitting them. Hold on, hold on. Okay, good. Everybody put your hand on the wall. We're gonna race. When I say three, we're gonna sprint across the ice. One, I didn't say go yet. Steve, get like that's what it was like. And then they sprint as fast as they can and they're falling and all over the place and they're competitive and beating on each other. And the very next group was a group of girls. And they said, all right. And they just stand there staring at you. You go, all right, we're going to race from here to the other side on the count of three. So you can put your hand on the wall and none of them have moved. They're listening still. And when I get to three, then you're going to go as fast as you can to the other side. Ready? And then they put their hand on. And this is 100% true story. I said go. And they got about halfway and one girl fell down and everyone stopped. And they came back and they picked her up. They made sure she was okay and they went to the other side. So I feel like girls, there's so much more the collaboration. I think guys, you have to earn their respect in terms of your knowledge. You got to prove what you're doing before they'll buy in. For girls, you have to prove you care. The
Mm.
minute they know you care, they're all in. For boys, even when you prove their knowledge, some of them are still going to challenge it. There's that 15, 16-year-old boy mentality of I got to beat the bigger guy. I got to prove I know more. And there's never any of that with girls. So when you look at that, for boys, it's really easy to get them to compete, but it's sometimes a lot more work to get them to care. And for
Mhm.
girls, man, getting them to care is easy. Sometimes getting them to compete is a little bit harder.
For sure. No, I totally agree with you. And recently, we've got a lot of girls that are wrestling now, so I've
Yeah.
dipped my toe into the coaching of the girls here too, and it's different, but like you just said, it's good in different ways. And the way I've described it myself is in wrestling, when you tell a boy to run through the wall, they're gonna say, and then they're just they're gonna put their head down and run through the wall, and that's probably what you're talking about with the
Yep.
competing. And then with the girls, they want to know which wall it is, who they can go with, what they can wear, who painted the wall, and it's a load of other questions and I love it. And then, but once you get all the questions out and
Oh,
know that you care, like you just talked about, they're going to compete just as hard as a boy. So it's
absolutely.
it's takes a little bit of time in knowing how to reach both boys and girls. But man, I'll tell you what, coaching girls has been
So
awesome, just like
rewarding.
you just talked about too. So pretty
So
sweet deal.
for two sides on that, Brady Wasvik, longtime coach with me for football, he resigns as the boys' head lacrosse coach. And he called me and he goes, "Hey, I just got a question. You resigned as the girls' head coach for hockey, and then you went to the boys. I'm debating should I just take some time off with the boys' staff to let them establish?" And I said, "Yeah, you should. The new coach deserves that. But the other thing is, hey, why don't you go coach girls?" And Wazzy's, I said, "Hey, I've known you forever. Just trust me. Just try it." I said, "Give her a shot." And he calls me the first day of tryouts last year. He's, "Oh my gosh, this is so awesome." And Fritzy now, this year coaching with me as an assistant for girls golf. He's never coached girls before. He's the same thing. He said, "Thank you."
Mm.
Like, nice to me. I'm like, "Yeah, that's what it looks like, Fritzy." So
That's
it's a good
awesome.
experience.
So you talked about going to Hastings High School your first day, getting assaulted by Coach Strain and Cook to coach football. Then you're walking down in the commons and Court grabs you right away. And now you're
Yep.
coaching hockey. So first year in town, you're coaching two sports. So just walk us through your coaching journey. I know it's been a lot of different levels for football, a lot of different genders for hockey and different levels for hockey. And as you mentioned, you're coaching girls golf now too. So if you just walk us through your coaching journey, I know maybe you can't remember all the details every single year, but just about talk about the levels you've been at and what sports you've been at as well.
Sure. So 2007, I get here. For girls hockey, that was the last year we went to the section final. I had Danielle Welch, who was a borderline Olympian, who was a Miss Hockey finalist, had a pipeline of girls that Cork had kind of nurtured and fostered in future All Americans at D3 and future captains at D1 and all that. So I fell into a hockey program that Jeff Corkish and I'd be remiss to not mention Steve Benson, the work they had done with the youth. So I was really lucky and I saw how to do it right for building a program in a town that hockey has some constraints financially and demographically and things like that. And Cork got me involved there. And so I'll start with hockey on that because that's been the more changes. And so I worked with the goalies, and then John Klimek was the JV head coach for the first year that I was there. And I was his assistant coach learning the other side of stuff, the defense, the running a power play and breakouts and all that. Cork would say, I still don't know how to run a power play, which is fine. And so I did that for 3 years. And then I immediately got involved. Even at first year, I got involved with the youth. And I said, hey, I'd like to give back. When I was coming up in South St. Paul, we had goalie clinics. So I went to the board and I created the goalie director position where we started working with as soon as they started skating. So like legitimately, Tyler McCarville's still in my phone. He's now 20 and I've coached him. He's going to Mankato State next year. It still says Mike McCarville because I named people based on the level the first time I started working with him. So I think he was 4 or 5 when I first started skating with him. And then I just got more and more involved in the hockey side of things on the girls' side. And then John Klimek's daughters moved up to varsity. So he transitioned for a variety of reasons into I don't want to say my assistant, that implies it wrong, but I ended up taking over like the head JV coaching role on the logistics and all that kind of stuff. And we really co-coached it together. So I was the head JV coach for a while, as well as the goalie coach for the girls on both varsity and JV. So I would skate both practices. I've always skated both practices, varsity and JV. And that gave me a great chance to learn from Benny on how to coach defensemen and how to build relationships really with Benny. He's the one that taught me nicknames are huge. Kids love it. And so when you struggle with learning a kid's name, they always come up with something. So he always had very witty names like Anna Williams was root beer because A&W. So things like that. And then I was able to watch Corkish and all these people that he had coming in and out the door, and Steve Benson. And Benny had two kids. He had a son and a daughter. And so he left for a little while. We called him Brett Favre because he would disappear back and forth. And then I ended up taking over coaching the defense. And that was a challenge because I wasn't able to coach the goalies as well, but it was really out of need. For once, Cork couldn't find a guy outside of me to really jump in and fill that spot. And Klimek wasn't able to. And so for 9 years, I really was a jack of all trades, trying to learn as much as I could from all of those people. And then Cork has 3 young kids of his own. I wanted to be able to go help spend time with them. And Benny was always telling him, you got to leave, you got to go. And the timing was right. Everyone always feels bad when you're the grade that the coach leaves right before your senior year. But there was a natural break. Kiki Radke, Anna Williams, Maddie True. There was this really strong group that gave Corkish a chance to make a run. They graduated. So there was that timing was right, but also his kids were coming of age and he had missed a bunch of stuff. So Corkish actually called me and said, hey, can you come over and meet in the off season? And so I show up at his house and I go in the basement, and Cork and Steve Benson. And man, do I respect the heck out of those guys. And Benny basically said, listen, I got 3 years left. I put in, I think at that point, 18 years with girls. And I just want to be a part of my daughter's high school experience and coach. He's coached that group the whole way up. And the reality is, if Cork resign and they hire someone outside of Hastings, they can bring in whoever they want. And he really wanted that opportunity. And I'd never set out to be a head coach at a varsity level. That was never my intention. But I didn't want to take the chance that Steve Benson didn't get a chance to senior night for his daughter, be on that bench and help guide that. So they talked to me. I interviewed and took the head job. So I was the head coach for 3 years. And I found out real quickly that wasn't for me in that particular sport at that particular level. And what I mean by that is Trent Hansen had come back. I was actually his first hire as an AD for Hastings. And he had a coaching seminar and he had all these people on this panel. Terry Hartman, Bob Majeski, all these guys that you were there. And Terry Hartman, I felt, was talking to me. Terry had dreamed of being a high school varsity football coach, head coach. And he said, I can't tell you how to be a head coach. I can tell you all sorts of stuff about being an assistant. He goes, and for Terry, he said, that was really hard for me to admit because this was a lifelong dream, but I'm not a head varsity coach. And I went and I met with Terry and talked to him about that. And I knew at that point, that wasn't my journey. And the reason is being a head coach at a sport like a football, a hockey, a baseball, a basketball, this is not to disparage any of the other ones, but every sport is different. And in those sports, there's some subjectivity between who should play and who shouldn't. And the best way I can describe the difference was this. My 9 years as an assistant coach, I had a 100% graduation party invite rate. And my first year as a head coach, I had a 40%. And I was the same guy, but the kids saw me different. Mm-hmm. And I realized that no matter what, there's going to be that transactional nature. And for me, emotionally, I just couldn't do that. That's not why I wanted to coach. I want the kids to love me. I want to be a part of their life. I want to joke with them. I want it to be genuine. And the cost of being a head coach means you're not going to get that from some kids, no matter what. You found out quickly. We all do. I'm really glad I went through being a head coach because it makes me a much better assistant, I think, because I can understand when head coaches make decisions that assistant coaches go, what are you doing? And so I actually let Trent know that I was going to resign. I waited until after our banquet and I resigned from the girls program. By this point, my own son is up and I'd done a lot of youth coaching. I was the MITE director. I started the recruiting director. I'd been on the youth hockey board for, I think, 12 years by that point. And then I just literally walked down the hall to Adam Welch and said, hey, you need a goalie coach? And he's like, are you serious? Yeah. And it was perfect timing because Tyler McCarville was a sophomore that year. So one of my last year as a head girls hockey coach, I also helped out the boys goalies. And then I just slid right over to there and I helped finish out that run. When Welch resigned, my son actually asked me to take a year off from winter hockey to just focus on him. You talked about that price that's paid. My son's paid a lot of the price of me coaching too, because every hour I'm on the ice with some other goalie, that means I'm on the ice not with him. Or every time I'm at a varsity football practice, I'm not at his football stuff. And so he asked me to put him first for a year, and I did. And I felt bad because it was Coach Klein's first year as a head coach. And I really liked the goalies, Holden Richardson and those guys. But I also wanted to give Tim Duggan, the head coach for Hastings now that took over after me for 3 years, a chance to have the space that Corkish allotted me to make it my program. From there, then I took that year off, and then Charlie's okay. That was great. If you want to coach, go ahead. And so I jumped back in both the boys and girls side because it just worked out well. We had a new girls head coach, and he reached out to me, Jim Joseph, and he has been an A+ hire in my opinion. Which of course means this. Some people aren't happy with him, but as a guy who coaches and sees what he does, he's been an A+. So the last 2 years, I've been back to both boys and girls goalie coaches, and then doing a little broadcasting along the way. So that's hockey. That's the most convoluted and that's just a sport that takes the most time. Football was really simple. I came in, I coached ninth grade for 3 years. They needed an offensive line coach, and they literally had no one. And Dana Strain called me up and said, "Your name is Mud. I'm gonna drive you up to Duluth and go clinic with the guy. Why don't you learn how to be an offensive line coach?" I spent about 6 or 7 years on varsity, coaching offensive line, and then 1 year on defensive line with Coach Fritzy. And then the same thing, the constraints of having a wife and kid. And then me and Lutz both made the same choice, just 1 year apart, to go back to ninth grade where the commitment is just a little bit less. And that extra hour is just huge, especially with a young kid. I coached with Lutz until 5 years ago, which every day I try to convince him to come back and coach with us. But I still got Wazzy there. So I'm the ninth grade head football coach. And then on Friday nights, I'm up in the booth talking to Welch and Fritzy on the headset just so I can stay connected with it. So football has been a pretty linear path of me just jumping in when they need and where they think I can help out the most. Spring's been all over. I coached golf on the boys' side for, I think, 2 years developmentally. Most of my time was spent coaching whatever my kid played in the spring. I've coached youth soccer. I've coached youth baseball. I coached a ton of football, obviously, with the youth. And then this year, he decided to transition from baseball to track. And they posted the girls' position. A couple of girls talked to me about it. Trent Hansen kind of winked and nudged, and Matt Klein really encouraged me to take it. And yeah, this is the first year doing that. So I'm 6 weeks into being the girls' head golf coach and just loving it. So as usual, it's always the same thing. It's just how can I get involved in helping out in this community and with kids?
For sure. It may be a loaded question once again, but you talked about a lot of different positions, a
Yeah.
lot of different sports here in town. If you had to pick maybe one grade level, one sport, one level, maybe two, where do
Yeah.
you think you're best at?
I'm a best as a goalie coach. I don't think there's any debate about
Mm.
that. I hope that doesn't come across as arrogant. It's a very specialized position. I have really dedicated a lot of time to that craft. I'm very fortunate in that a lot of very intelligent people have seen something in me and invested in me. So I've gone to Finland to coach, or excuse me, Nova Scotia to coach through Finland stuff. If I was going to go back to the very beginning and tell myself something that wasn't related to that, I think the biggest thing is it's okay not to be perfect. I'm not very good at that. This is in the classroom too. I don't know how to not, I'm still trying. I don't know how to not think I can help every kid. I don't know how to not think I can find that button to push, to motivate, to drive, and it's not about talent or wins and losses, but even a kid who doesn't have the ability to be the player they want to be, I always feel like it's my job to find a way to make that the best experience for them so that they still feel amazing about themselves. And this, when you're dealing with people, you can't always win. You can't always do everything right. You can't always say everything right. And I think I would say to give myself a little bit more grace, because the more grace I give myself, the more at ease I am. And then the better chance I have of doing the right thing and saying the right thing. When you put that pressure on yourself in those moments, sometimes it comes out the wrong way. And that
Mhm.
pressure ends up going in a direction you're not trying to.
For sure. And I think that's just exactly what you talked about, coaching Charlie. You waited for that moment for
Yeah.
14 years, a lot of pressure on you, a lot of good athletes, and the talk was really big. And the other thing you just mentioned there too was obviously you said it before, was the schedule. You have no control over
Yeah.
that. So you got to play who you play, and a lot of pressure, and that love that you're trying to give the kids, love that you're trying to instill in your son on the field. It comes off maybe in different ways at times.
Yep.
But hopefully at the end of the day, the kids, and I know the kids know this about you too. It's just how much you care about them, and how much you are trying to use football to teach life lessons as well. So that's really important
That's the hope.
for sure. Now, maybe the other way around, what is something that you phased out along the way? So this is something I know thinking about Coach Willett. I had him back on the podcast here a long time ago, and he always thought that he needed to just, I don't want to say freak out, but he always used maybe one time a year that he would just yell at the kids. And he thought it was a way to really show them how much he cared. And I even was talking to a couple kids and they're like, oh my God, I remember exactly when he did that to us this one time, this one year. So that was something he thought he had to do to maybe whip them back into shape. Once again, show them how much they have to care about it. Maybe they're getting too lackadaisical out there on the tennis court. So that's one thing he talked about that he phased out throughout his years of coaching. But if you had to think about your years of coaching here in Hastings or anytime in your life.
I get invited to a lot of different places. I've been very fortunate to be on the ice with people I'm not nearly qualified enough to be on the ice with. And the only reason is to come back and spread it here. I presented at a lot of nationwide goaltending symposiums and seminars and taught about development, stuff like that. And I've been offered a couple of things there, but I think what's gotten me into those rooms is I'm not ladder climbing. I'm not looking to be a junior coach. I'm not looking to be a college coach. I just want to come back and teach Hastings kids the best I possibly can. And I think that not only my knowledge about the position, and more importantly, I think the fact that I know I don't know enough. So I'm constantly asking the goalies I have when they go someplace else, what'd you learn? What'd you try? Bring it back and tell me because I'm missing something. We all are. But also that's a relational position. A goalie, you coach wrestling, when you lose, it's on you, right? You get pinned. It's hard to look at anyone else. For goalies, that's the same thing. Six things happen in front of you. 3 teammates make a mistake. Puck ends up in the net and it doesn't matter. You gave up a goal. And so that relational part of that job really, I think, fits in my wheelhouse.
What was it like this year? You talked about coaching ninth grade again. Your son Charlie is a ninth grader this year. So you coached him this year in football. What was that like coaching your son?
Hard.
Yeah.
Differently hard. Not my son. Coaching my son is easy because he knows how much I love him to the point that it annoys him how much I love him. You know what I mean? But he knows when I get hot, which I do. I think all of us coaches do. A lot of us are old school. Fikema and I were just talking about this, that we're the generation of yelling is loving because we see something in you and we're pushing you to be a better version of yourself. So when I get hot, Charlie knows how that pattern is, where I get hot because I care and I'm pushing, and then I'm going to be cool. It's not going to last. There's no held grudges. It's just to make you better. But the other thing that was unfair about this year for that grade was the expectations were really high. You've got some elite athlete. Marlo Strain is a pretty impressive specimen, correct? I don't think there's a single sport in Hastings that wouldn't love to have him out. He's currently playing 2 sports in the spring. He ended up choosing basketball, and I'm sure that's a point you'd love to get him back for wrestling, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then you got a Zach Shattuck. As far as raw athleticism, that's pretty impressive. And then for football, this is the first time I can think of that I had about 7 or 8 bodies. Adam Welch, Tom Cross called, he coaches football. He called Adam at a clinic where we had our guys out and he goes, hey, how's it looking? All this and that. And Adam's talking to him and he goes, how's the line looking? He goes, good news and bad news. The good news is it's the same as the bad news. The freshmen and the seniors look about the same size, right? Johnny Teglin, if you just look at the numbers, Johnny Teglin is so much stronger than my kid. And he's a senior. He's on the cusp of being a man. But if you just look at the numbers, Johnny Teglin is 6 foot, 220-ish. They play center. Charlie Colvin is 5'11", 220-ish. Now, their squat numbers are very different. So I came in and there was a lot of pressure I put on myself for them to achieve the best possible experience they could. There were some unique athletes that I wanted to make sure to accelerate their development as much as I could. And you just care more. I've been waiting for this year for 14 years and you only get one. I'm never going to coach him in football again. And so that I just know how short that is. And then on top of that, for your listeners, I don't know if they know this, but our football schedule was insane.
Yeah.
We had 7 of our 8 opponents made it to the section final. The only one that didn't went 7-1 in their regular season. And so it was just and we're going to have that next year. So it's this gauntlet of a schedule. And at 9th grade, we play everyone. It doesn't matter. When we go to St. Thomas, when we go to Cretin, it's not about wins and losses, although we want to win. We beat St. Thomas this year. We almost beat Cretin. We came back from a huge deficit, but also every kid played and it didn't matter. And so it was a wonderful experience. It was really stressful that I put on myself. And I'm going to be honest, not my best coaching performance. Not X's and O's, that stuff is fine. But as far as my ability to manage the room and read the room, you're awful close to the situation. It was tough. But it was something I'd never give back, ever.
For sure. I think that maybe leads into my next question. I always like hearing about growth and development, especially from our athletes, our former athletes, our alumni, our current athletes, and especially coaches too. So I always think about the doc rolls up in the DeLorean, opens it up, and says, hop in, Colvin. We got to go back here and we got to talk to the old Josh when he first was hired. So if you could go back to the first couple years, first couple days you were coaching, something that you do now that you wish you started off when you were first coaching here in town, what do you think that would be for you?
There's two things. If I was going to go back to, for example, being a varsity head coach, the first thing I would tell myself is the schedule is maybe the second most important thing you do. You got to care about the kids first. That's number one. But I just kept the schedule because I thought, hey, we had contracts. I could have broken them because I was a new coach, but I'm like, hey, you honor the obligations you have. But the reality is the level of talent you have, you need to put them in a position where they can compete. For you guys, for wrestling, you're a state entrant every year. That's the expectation. But if your entire regular season is nothing but STMA and Simile, that's tough emotion and it's tough morally. And so I'll give great credit to the guys I coach with that have those choices. Klein does a fantastic job of scheduling to that. So does Joseph. Corkish did too. Football, we just don't get that choice. So scheduling would be the one logistic thing.
What's something that you have phased out along the way?
First of all, I teach next to Willette, and I wish I could have been there for I can't imagine him actually genuinely yelling at kid. I would love to have been there. That would have been amazing.
So Joe Zach talks about this time. They were at I think it was raining or something like that, and they were at in Burnsville, maybe. It was like, I'm getting the story probably completely wrong, but it was something along like an indoor mall that had some tennis courts in it. So they had to go there, and the kids were on a roll. They had a really good tennis team that year, and they were on a roll, and they were not taking practice too serious that day. And Mick just lost it on them. And Joe just said, oh my God, yes, that happened. And I remember exactly when he lost it on us. But to Joe's credit and to Coach Lett's credit too, they whipped it back into shape, took practice seriously, and finished off the season strong. So maybe it does work and he didn't need to phase it out, but we'll see.
I just wish I could have seen it. For me, something I've phased out, I'll stick with football on this one is I remember actually a couple of the dads. So you talk about the things that are pressures for this year with Charlie is I coached with those dads. And this is the first time they're peers of me that I'm coaching their kids specifically. You know what I mean? You have those different relationships. You're going to find out. You'll have those different relationships with guys. I coached with Marlowe's dad and Jack Mosman's dad at Little Raider. And now they're on the team. And like you said, getting beat up a little bit by Owatonna, you get some fumbles, things like that, and that pressure builds. But it's funny. I'm not a yeller at games at all in football. I stopped that. If I were to ever head back, I learned under two guys who your coaching style should be your personality style. Corkish and Benson, both for hockey, were very boisterous, yelling directions, yelling out, keeping energy up, stuff like that. And they said they tried different ways and it didn't work. So I just copied that, jumped in. But for me in football, I'm not a during the game yeller. You're loud too. But like when things go bad, I've gotten very good at staying in that moment and just focusing on the next task rather than letting the emotion of the moment hit me. And so early on, that heat, that yelling that I do at practice would carry over into games. And what I learned was these kids are putting so much pressure on themselves to perform in front of other people that none of them want to make a mistake. And the way that I respond to that mistake is huge. I still remember the day I realized I had it right. In that moment, it doesn't mean I don't still make mistakes, but this was the moment. I just actually saw him at the golf course the other day, Dan Brown. He was a free safety and we were playing Simile and he kept cheating up. And I'm yelling to him, you can't cheat up. They're going to throw the post. They're going to throw it. And sure enough, they saw it. They set it up. They go right over the top for him, touchdown. And he comes to the sideline and you can tell he was waiting to get lit up. And I said, all right, you've seen it now. He goes, yeah. I'm like, when they do this, you're going to see this kind of thing. The motion's going to come this way. They're going to set it. Just wait, delay it until, and then you can do it. I said, and you can say, he ended up picking off 3 balls that game. And you could tell he was waiting for me to yell, and I didn't. And I think about that moment because I'm so proud of myself and then how it worked. Dan Brown ended up picking off 3 balls. And by the way, we lost 7-6. So like that play that still screwed up. We still technically cost us the game. But that's what is supposed to happen at freshman football is you make the mistakes and you learn from it. And on the other hand, there's other stories of me lighting up kids at varsity football games because of them making mistakes. I look at it and see if I had handled this in a different way. So when I talk about lighting up or yelling, I'll speak to my kid, Charlie. He knows there's 2 things that are going to get me hot. One is, are you treating other people poorly? Are you treating other people bad? Your teammates, your peers, those kind of things. And 2 is your effort. And that's Paul Veit. That's where it comes from is There's two things you can control, right? Attitude and effort. Those things I'm going to yell at you about, but your success or failure, I've phased out any kind of what can be viewed as negative or aggressive or any coaching for you drop a ball. So what? Like that's so what? You run a lazy route and I tell you and you keep running it, then I'm going to get on you. But like you just, hey, you strike out, it's baseball. That's what's going to happen.
I agree with you. Exactly what you just said, talking about success and things like that. And obviously we've worked with Trent for years and
Mhm.
he's made us define all these words many times over. So I got a couple different questions. Maybe we can roll them all up into one. I try to
Sure.
ask one question at a time, but the questions I got for you is why do you coach? And I think you've already talked about that before in the rapid fire or now too with creating relationships with
Yep.
kids. And I think that leads into another question I had, the best and rewarding thing about coaching. Once again, the lifelong relationships you have with kids. You talked about going to Panera in Woodbury and meeting one of your old athletes right there. And,
Yeah.
and obviously it's like you guys never had any time away from each other. And then you just talked about success and defining success in a couple different ways. So I guess you've answered all those questions before, maybe throughout the interview here. But if you just want to put a bow on all three
Sure.
of those things, talking about why you coach, talking about rewarding things with coaching, and talking about success. Once again, put a bow on all those together.
Yeah, I'll even give you talked about Trent and the why we play and the inside out coaching stuff. And I was lucky enough to be a head coach, and he selected me to be part of that pilot group because I was on multiple levels and multiple genders. And so I was a part of that. And I refined that purpose statement throughout. But it got to the point that I have it memorized, not because I memorize it, but because it's true. And it's the same reason I teach. And what I have written on that is I coach and teach to build meaningful, lifelong relationships built on perseverance or integrity. And so in other words, like, I'm gonna do the right thing every time. Now, that doesn't mean I don't make mistakes, but I'm trying to do the right thing. And the integrity part is whether somebody's looking or not. Well, hockey players know there's things that they don't agree with me on, but I don't do certain things. I don't skate across the East Rink just because it's easy to go to the West Rink practice. Like I'm walking around. Whether anybody's watching, I park at the front door and walk to the back because that's the right thing to do. And when I screw up, I own it. And then the perseverance is, man, it is hard. No matter what, it's hard. And I think when you talk about the reason to coach, let's put a complete ball on this. I became a teacher and coach because I didn't have a dad. My grandfather did the best he did. He was a wonderful human who, like all of us, was incredibly flawed. But the people who were there for me, Russ Welch, I wasn't always a fan of in ninth grade. He was an old school coach, but he was yelling, what meant I knew he was watching. I knew he was paying attention. And Jim Pohl, completely different coach, sat me down and talked about what football team I was rooting for from college and what that said about me and integrity and all those kind of things. And why do we cheer for who we do? And so those people, those coaches, my band teacher, Rick Peterson, swearing at me in the halls because I wasn't making the right choice as far as academics, which is if you've ever been a 6'2" athlete sworn at by a short little band teacher and you just have to sit there and own it, that's a good thing. It doesn't feel good in the moment, but you got to own it. And those people really helped me. I didn't always like it at the time, but when I think back to the conversations that I had with coaches in high school, the teachers I had in high school, the ones that stick out are the ones I didn't always like at the moment. But there's a reason I didn't like them. It's because it's cognitive dissonance. I was doing something that I shouldn't have. I was not living up to the ideals I had, and I wasn't living the life I wanted. So why do I coach and teach? It's literally just that. The relationships are amazing. These kids give back so much. You talked about Panera, but that's a regular thing. And it's everywhere. It's amazing how often I'm somewhere and I run into a former student athlete, whatever. When I went out of town for the summer, Kit Rudy stayed at my house and watched my dog. Brooke Weber, I was at her wedding. Courtney Boucher, I watched her doctoral dissertation online. That list goes on. And I still talk to Charlie Carpenter about politics and the economy. Literally, we text weekly. And so the relationships with these kids isn't a fleeting. Mark Hunnicky gave Charlie Colvin his first set of golf clubs, who I gave to Paul Olson for his kids for their first set of golf clubs. And Mark Hunnicky now lives 4 houses down from me. Pete Schultz was a freshman my first year. I coached and taught in Hastings, and now he's across the hall as a colleague. And when you think about all those sacrifices that we make, and all those sacrifices my wife makes and my kid makes, it's not worth it to me for a game, not worth it to me for a win, not worth it for me for a kid to get a scholarship. But it is absolutely worth it every time to be part of that experience for them. And my most recent one, Maddie Haynes at golf, watching her shoot a 44 at Hidden and watching her think through how to struggle and how to manage the course the way she wanted and seeing that I'm a tiny little piece in it. She's got her own swing coach, but I'm there to help her mentally get through that and create a great environment for her to have that experience. And then the car ride home where Emily Toohey and Gabby McDowell are just ripping me apart in the car on the same ride home. It's just, it's hard to say no. You talked about that I'm in a lot of things. It's hard to say no because I'm not saying yes to a paycheck because the pay is who cares? Literally, who cares? It's easy to say no to the hours, but it's almost impossible to say no to good kids.
Hmm. You know what? To maybe sum it up, what you're saying too is we spend a lot of time away from our families, our wives, and our kids. And I think the one thing, and I don't think this is everywhere, and I've been to a couple different places, and I know it's not everywhere, but the one thing that I think is so special about Hastings is I just hope, and I know here in town, but I hope that there's going to be people that are going to invest in my kids like we're investing in other people. And once again, I know that's in Hastings, and I know just to take it from your point of view, you're going to pass Charlie off on our sophomore coaches, and Pete
Uh-huh.
McGinnis and Josh McClay are going to invest in Charlie just as much as you're investing in other kids. And then you pass them off to Jason Cook and Dana Strain and Van Duzer and all those people, and they're going to invest in him just as much as you're investing in other people. Sometimes people look at you sideways when you tell them how much time and effort you're spending with not the people that you're related to. You hope once again that people are going to invest in your kids like you're investing in other people. And in Hastings, that is happening every single day.
Not just the coaches. So let's touch on that. McClay is more excited to coach my kid in football than I am. Like
Mhm.
he talks about it all. We were just texting yesterday about workout programs in the summer and things like that. I saw it with you and Charlie at the middle school, him telling me how you would sneak up and scare him. You know what I mean? Pete McGinnis chirping him, Dave Davenport chirping him. Like the number of people who surround my kids. So yeah, I'm away from my kid with other people's kids, but other people are filling that in. And of course, the coaches, 100%. I can't wait for Charlie to have the experience of being under Dana Strain and the kind of character integrity that Dana Strain expects from his staff and that the rest of them are going to instill. But not just that, what about the other students? I have
Mhm.
had Charlie around these kids since he was born. I have pictures of him at football practice at 2 and 3 years old. Jordy Klimick held him in the locker room at 3 months old. And here's the thing, like they're a bigger influence on him than I am. Lucas Foss right now is a huge influence on Charlie Colvin. I asked Charlie over the summer as he was getting into high school, I said, part of what you need to figure out now is who you want to be. And he just sat there, he goes, I don't know. And I said, that's okay. So figure out who you don't want to be. And he said a couple of things and then he paused and it got quiet. And he goes, I want to be like Johnny Teglin.
Mhm.
And what he was talking about is a guy who, man, Johnny Teglin made Charlie feel good about himself early on. Johnny Teglin constantly talked to him, makes him feel a part of it. Johnny Teglin is out there being something. Tomorrow, I don't know when this will air. Obviously, you're not going to edit it at 9:18, and I talk too much, so it's going to take you a while. Tomorrow, on May 3rd, I'm running Advisory Madness. And Charlie's team, Imperial Japan under Mr. Lutz. You talk about having a great guy for your kid to be around. Charlie actually, as a freshman, is going to be in front of the entire student body in the Commons, shaking his butt, trying to get ping pong balls out of a
Big-
Kleenex box.
Yeah.
You know who he's going against?
I'm going to guess Johnny Taglin
Yeah,
because you talked about him, but yeah. Okay.
I just found out today, Teglin is in Cook's class,
Yeah.
and Teglin stepped up, as a lot of kids are too embarrassed to go up there and do what's gonna look silly, and Charlie's, "I got the best time, I'm gonna do it." That's what Hastings is.
Mhm.
It's not just the adults that gives back, it's the kids that make each other better, which is why we do it. Such a good place.
I definitely agree with you. So we got a couple questions left here. We always like ending with a couple of pieces of advice for parents, coaches, and the student athletes that you're talking about here. If we take that first group, parents and coaches, I know it's once again a loaded question. You've been through a lot of sports. You've been a head coach. You've been assistant coach. You've been all over the place here. If you had to give parents and coaches a few pieces of advice from your experiences, what do you think it would be?
I'm gonna combine 2 things, from 2 people I look up to. The first is from Mr. Dress, an English teacher who before AP tests had kids chant, "It just doesn't matter."
Mhm.
The wins and losses don't matter. They mean something. We keep score for a reason. But when you're 40 years removed, it's not going to be the wins and losses that remember. It's going to be the experience and the journey with them. And so really focus on what you want. I'm not sitting here thinking about my son and his varsity football run to the state championship at all. I'm sitting here thinking about what better human beings can I surround him with than the ones he's going to get lucky enough to have? So enjoy the journey and trust in the fact that the overwhelming majority of people in this profession are really good people who care. And then the second piece is from Steve Benson. Man, it goes quick. Don't blink. We're 20 calendar days, or not calendar, but 20 school days before my kid basically done being a freshman. And then I'm down to 3 years of getting to watch this and be a part of it, and I'm going to miss it.
Hmm. Definitely agree with you. Now, you've been working with these kids for a long time, the student athletes, maybe the same piece of advice there. Don't blink because it's going to be gone in a second. But if you had to look at those kids, give them a couple pieces of advice, what do you think would be?
The first is the toughest, and it's the one we don't like, which is be honest with yourself about who you are. Do you love the sporting? Do you love being with the people? And both are great answers. But being good has a cost. And be honest, are you willing to pay it? Kiki Radke, in my time here, is the most successful girls hockey player that we've had. But this is in no way an insult, but she was not the most talented. She was fast. Kiki Radke was hands down the hardest working athlete I've ever seen, boys or girls that I've coached. And most people don't want to do. I didn't want to do that. I wasn't willing to sit in the garage my junior year for hours on end shooting thousands of pucks. If you really want to be that good, are you willing to pay the price? And if you're not, that's okay. But my biggest piece of advice for athletes is know who you really are and what you're willing to pay, because where we see so much emotional turmoil for athletes, it seems to me to be when those two things don't align. I want to be, but I don't want to pay the price. In other words, do you really want to be, or do you just want the result of it? You don't have to be a college athlete to have a great athletic experience. You don't have to be a professional athlete to have a great athletic experience. It shouldn't be about 3 years from now and do I sign and do I commit? It should be about this year.
Perfect. Colvin, that's all the questions I got for you. Last thing we always do is just turn the microphone over to our guest. If there's anything else you want to get off your chest, any questions I forgot to ask you, like I said, any other shout outs you want to give, like I said, the microphone is yours and you can go for it.
Only thing I'm going to give a shout out is literally Hastings. You asked me earlier, favorite time of the year, and I told you Rivertown Days, and I would hope it's pretty obviously why. There is nothing better than going down to Rivertown Days and seeing all of the people in this community. I watched Nerdy. Do you know who that is?
No, I don't.
I'm so excited this summer. Nerdy and Spin Doctors back to back. 2-3 years ago, I'm down there, and here's this very large. His first song is I'm 2XL and I Love Myself, right? A bigger black guy from Apple Valley, rapping and singing about like Dungeons and Dragons and stuff. And I'm looking at the crowd in Hastings, and there's guys with cowboy hats next to guys with blue dyed hair and all of that. All of that stuff just disappears. In Hastings at Rivertown Days, we just come together, and it's what makes this place such a great experience. So I just want to say thank you to anyone that's listened that has let me be a part of your kid's life, be a part of this community, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the run, just being part of Hastings.
Awesome. Thanks, Colvin.
You bet.